As a chronically lazy guy, I can confidently say that willpower is not the answer to your discipline problems. So in this video, I'm taking you through the counterintuitive method that took me from years of failed discipline attempts and terrible self-control to being someone I can finally be proud of. But before we get to that, I want to address the fallacy of willpower that's been holding me back for years. We have all tried to make gargantuan efforts to control ourselves in order to be more disciplined. We'll stick to a diet for around a month and torture ourselves in doing so. We'll burn out trying to work for 10 hours a day. And eventually, all of these methods will fall apart because they fail to acknowledge that willpower is like a muscle. This is why we're never able to stick things through, especially when they get hard or uncomfortable. The consistency required to be disciplined over long periods of time is simply not something that willpower alone is able to provide. And eventually, I learned how to use two underlying psychological mechanisms that make most of us impulsive and lazy, but if framed in the correct way, can completely change your life. To explain this first bias, we're going to play a bit of devil's advocate. The thing about a lot of bad habits, the ones you want to avoid, is that they all feel good in the moment. Things like social media and junk food release huge amounts of neurochemicals that make you feel amazing. Eventually, your brain associates dopamine with the action, which is the crux of how the habits form. So what I did to make discipline just a little bit easier is to simply flip it on its head. We've all tried to brute force our way into doing something hard to be more disciplined. But what if instead we made the activity something we actually want to do? And this is where we have to take advantage of hyperbolic discounting. And that's basically the idea that we tend to favor things that come with a lot of short-term pleasure, especially if the alternative is something where we see the rewards in the long term, but there's a bit of pain associated with that in the present. To make these kind of things easier, we want to simply make the process more fun. To do this, you can either make the process itself more fun, for example, listening to music while you're in the gym, or you can introduce rewards after it to add something that your brain wants to fight for. So I want you to pause this video right now. Write down 2 things you want to be more consistent with. And then for each of those, write down 1 to 2 ways you can either make the process more fun or introduce rewards after it. You will thank yourself for how easy discipline starts to become when you actually start doing this. And this second bias is the secret sauce, because it takes advantage of an underlying human psychology that is so strong, it single-handedly wiped out my discipline problems. And it works like this. As humans, we're hell-bent on our identity and how we view ourselves. And there's an entire concept called cognitive dissonance, which is basically the comfort that comes up when what you're doing doesn't align with the beliefs you have or the person you think yourself to be. If you're the kind of person who gets up early, sleeping in makes you feel guilty because you know you're not the kind of person who does that. We want to leverage this to our favor. Specifically, if you tied your identity to someone who does X, Y, Z, you'd automatically do that thing a lot more. There's a ton of ways to do this, but my favorite is called superhero me. So right now, I want you to imagine the kind of person you want to be in 1 year. Then write down everything you know about that person you want to be. Let's say their personality, their habits, and how they conduct themselves on a daily basis. This is the identity that we're going to try tie ourselves to, and it will be hard at the start to do those things. There's no arguing that. But every time you do it, it acts as a kind of vote for the person you want to be. Every time you make a choice to fit into that mold, whether that's going for a run or reading a book instead of doom scrolling before bed, you start to feel good about yourself. In the same way, when you go on a run, it feeds into the identity of I run every day. This starts to compound over time, and eventually you start thinking, fuck me, I can actually do hard things like going for a run and reading instead of doom scrolling and sitting on my ass. Eventually, you get to the point where you're not relying on motivation to get the hard stuff done. Rather, you're just being the person you believe you are. I think that's a much happier way to live. If you're looking to be more disciplined, chipping away at your bad habits is a must-do. And watching this video would go a long way to doing that. Because it goes over my favorite system to break bad habits and how to replace those with rock-solid habits that will serve you for years to come. Thank you, friends. I'll see you next time.